So as Honosase and Wendy shared with us today, they did the friendship dance. So normally, some people might see just a sidestep for other nations. Like if you went to a powwow, sometimes you'll hear round dance songs. Those are kind of along the same lines, but ours is danced a little differently. Normally, the women would be on the inside and the males are on the outside, because our people we follow the mother. So the mothers carry so much meaning, and our women carry so much meaning because they carry our clan, they carry our nation, and we follow our mothers. So the males were always our protector, but we were the nurturers, and we bring to this world. So we were always looked at as one of the leaders in our community, but also working in harmony with our men as well all the time. But again, I just want to thank everybody for welcoming us and asking us to share. So unfortunately, our family members couldn't make it today. I think we have one that is just online watching with us, but I do have permission to share some of their stories, but I thought it would be really interesting to be able to show you what we have currently been working on here at Gunakosha. So one of the biggest things when I took this role on as supporting our missing and murdered families was I wanted to see something physical to show how many people have been murdered in our community, because our people kind of migrate, because even though we are here on the Six Nations Reserve, that wasn't really our home. Like I'm from Cayuga Nation, so technically my family is from Cayuga Lake area in the US. Other families are from different nations, Tuscarora. So there's all 6 of those nations residing here in Six Nations, but there are still a lot of our families that are in the States as well. So I had said that there has been a lot of our community members that have been murdered, both on this side of the border and in the US as well. So I wanted to, as long as they had roots to Six Nations, they were counted on this timeline. So that was something I wanted to be able to share with you today. So I will jump right into that, just knowing that we're kind of on time here.
Amber?
Yeah.
Amber? May I shortly interrupt you to have a chance to introduce and welcome everyone? I didn't do that before.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to hear this Thanksgiving. I really would like to thank Eddie and his colleague, and also you, Amber. It's a wonderful way to start our webinar with this Thanksgiving and the friendship song. I think we are all friends here, and this is a wonderful way. Thank you. And I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar here about missing and murdered Indigenous women. A special welcome to Sharon Fisher, our immediate past president of SI and past president of SIA, and to former SIA President Rosemary Reed, Governor-elect Cheryl Ball and Cary Grant, Wanda Price, the SIA member of the SI Advocacy Committee, and a welcome to our guest from Australia, Chris Knight, and from the UK, Lisa Davis. My name is Gertrude Hocke, and I'm the governor of Eastern Canada region of Soroptimist. My home is in London, Ontario, and I would like to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and the Canadian nations. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. It grieves us deeply that women and girls from our Indigenous sisters suffer and experience violence, and we firmly believe that achieving justice is imperative. As a worldwide organization, Soroptimist International strives to enhance the education, health, human rights, and status of all women and girls. Soroptimist International incorporates 5 federations, of which Soroptimist International of the Americas includes almost 30,000 members in 20 countries and territories. Our regional clubs improve the lives of women and girls, especially by offering educational opportunities. As Soroptimists, we promote human rights for all and decry gender-based violence wherever and whenever it occurs. Thus, we believe it is our duty to recognize and address the issues of murdered and missing Indigenous women. Governor Suzanne Heron from Western Canada region and I organized this webinar series as a joint project between our regions, and we decided to offer it to the wider community. Today, we will listen to the situation of impacted women. We will hear about the perspective of a healing organization. We will listen to a story of a family member, and it will be brought to us by Amber. And finally, we will hear about the findings of a person who has researched the situation for many years. Before we start, I would like to mention a few housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded. We kept the chat open for you to connect with each other. We expect your messages in the chat to remain respectful. If you notice inappropriate messages, you will be warned and may be expelled from the meeting. We would ask you to refrain from texting during the presentation, to actively listen to the speakers. You can use the chat later for posting your questions or appreciation of the speaker. And now it is my honor to turn the spotlight back to Amber Silversmith. As she mentioned at the beginning, she is from the Six Nations and is a counselor at the Sonashiwa Sexual Violence Center. In this role, Amber provides culturally appropriate counseling to Indigenous families that had suffered the loss of someone being murdered or is still missing. She also works with a self-help group of family members called Love Starts With Us, who support others who share the same pain as they have. Being faced with the cruel fates of many women, Amber mentioned that her 2 beautiful daughters, Jessa and Maggie, and her husband, Jake, keep her grounded. Amber's goal is to raise awareness and educate about the impacts of murder and violence against the Ogwiho, the original people in Canada and the US. Amber, welcome again, and thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Okay, so again, thank you for having us. I know that we were a little pressed for time, so I'm gonna go through the timeline with you. But as we're going through the timeline, just a reminder for everybody, if you feel a little triggered from hearing the stories of these family members, by all means, put your feet flat on the floor, hand on the heart, and just focus on your breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Okay. So I'm going to share screen. Oh yeah, there it goes. So again, when I took this job on, I knew of probably 6 of the females that are on this list. And those were the ones that we had contact with our program originally. And I had said, there's more. There's so many from our community that are not accounted for. So this is our public timeline. So we do know of other people. So the ones that don't have a name to it, those are the ones that we have yet to contact their family, or their family has asked that we don't share their names, but we could represent them on our timeline. So altogether, you will see the women and girls are the triangles, and the squares are the babies or boys or men. And in total, and I know this number is not correct either, of 32, because there has been more since within this past 2 years. So I haven't been able to get in contact with those families just yet. But what I will do today is go through some of the families that have approved me to share their story today. And so Flora Isaacs, she was one of our first at the beginning of the timeline here. My mouse here, the very first one. She was murdered by her husband, and it was very brutal. After he murdered her, the kids were left for the 60s scoop to come and get them. So the murder also left the children without parents, because then he went to jail for the murder. And I think he only spent maybe 10 years in jail. And the kids ended up going to residential school and in Brantford, Ontario. So more of trauma put on that family cell instead of just the murder happening. So now we're gonna have all kinds of things happening for that family. Mabel Farmer, this is the second one. She was our first sexual assault murder on the Six Nations Reserve. And it was just a stranger broke into her house and sexually assaulted her and then murdered her afterwards. That was, from the elders that I have spoken to, it was really shocking to everybody back in 1983. So it was really hard for them to get past that trauma. And the ones that I have spoken to, they remember it vividly. It shook everybody in the nation here, of that someone was capable of committing a crime like that. And the next one that I will share is Paula Joy Martin. She is the fourth triangle here. So she was fleeing a domestic dispute with her longtime partner, and it was a very abusive relationship that she was in. And she fled the relationship to a hotel in Brantford, Ontario, just close to our reserve. And after that, he found her later on and murdered her in that hotel room. And we currently have a white pine tree that is planted in memory of her in the front of our organization here at Gunaquashra. And within the 1990s, we had our first baby boy that was murdered. He was murdered by his father. His name was Baby David. And he was murdered in Buffalo. And it was shaken baby syndrome. And another that I have approval to share is Shelley Joseph. So Shelley Joseph was murdered in Hamilton, Ontario. That was in 2004. And she was living in Hamilton, but was murdered by her landlord. It was shared in court that they were having a dispute, and it escalated into murder. There were some rumors of possible relationship, but family is very strong that that is not true, and that she was targeted because of the life that she currently was living, and that he was after her for some time. And the next one I have approval to share is Regina General. That was in 2008. And she was 6 months pregnant with a baby boy, and was murdered by her partner, the father of the baby boy. It was said that they got into an argument, and that it escalated to him choking her and murdering her, and the baby died with her that day. And we count the babies if they're born or not born, because in our belief, in our traditional belief, is that as soon as that baby has a spark, that they are life, they matter. So we are always sure to count our unborn babies. And the next one is Helena Rivera. She was murdered in Buffalo. And she is actually the sister of Baby David. And she was an older sister to Baby David, but in 2011, again, in a very abusive relationship, she was trying to leave him, and he found out, and he retaliated, and he was saying to her that he was going to kill the children. So she went to protect them, and he shot her multiple times as she was trying to run away and save the kids. And the kids were witness to this murder, and they are currently living with grandma, and they work very hard to bring awareness to her story. And a lot of the males that you see here on the timeline, a lot of them, we are struggling to connect with family, probably because of the stigma that's attached to our missing and murdered men, that that there's a lot of attention around our women, but what about our men? Because there's almost as equally amount of males that have been murdered as well. And in our northern communities and our flying communities, it's a lot higher, our men numbers. But so we always share that as well, just because it is prevalent in our territory. But the most recent that maybe some of you have heard about is the triple homicide that we've currently had in, well, recently in 2018 in Six Nations. They're in London area at another reservation. But that included Melissa Miller, Alan Porter, Michael Jameson, and Melissa's unborn baby boy. And it was said that they were lured to a house, and a revenge kill had happened. And it was meant for the female, but the other two were trying to protect her, and ended up all being murdered, including the baby. So right now, that is what I am going to share with you. And it's a little daunting because when we look back at this timeline, one of the biggest things, the forces that drove me to want to do a timeline is when I read the RCMP report. So there's two reports done by the RCMP for Canada. And in that report, there's only two reported murders that had happened in the timeline of the RCMP report. But yet you can clearly see that there was probably 4, 5, 6. So that's what made me wonder that I knew it wasn't right. I knew the statistics wasn't right. And then when I went to Google our statistics as Indigenous people here in Canada, I thought there's gotta be updated stats because it's so big. And maybe that's only because I can feel it in my community and I know the grief that our family members are feeling, because I remember when Tashina got murdered and it was a huge thing because she was only a few years older than me. And I remember the fear that was in the air. You could feel it. You could cut it with a knife because it was just so, everyone was scared because it hadn't happened in our territory like that. And a baby was involved that just amped it up even more. But with every single one, there is this ripple effect of community, because then it's not just the victim's family that gets impacted, but our community is so small knit that the offender's family is also impacted by the acts of murder. So I'm always really big about seeing the whole picture of it all. Because again, just like I shared earlier with Flora, it wasn't just the murder that we had to deal with after that. Then it was residential school. And then it's the grief of all of that. And then it's the grief of identity. And then it's the grief of, you know, trying to get us back to who we are as a people. So it's a very compound thing to help our people through the grief of murder. But at this time, I am just wanting to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions for myself or our men that has come to support. And I really want to give it up to them as well, because they help balance us. They help balance our people, because that's why I always like to include them in our stuff, because it's important, because we need healthy men, but we need healthy women to help stop the violence in all of our communities. So at this time, I'll open it up for questions.
Yeah.
Amber, thank you so very much. Hayushka, it's Suzanne. I'm coming to you, to all of us from the traditional territory of the Sliaman Nation, Hawaii or Laskiti Island. And it's staggering and very just incredible to hear. And just before we get to questions, I want to invite Tammy Ayer to say a few words. Tammy is a reporter with the Yakima Herald, and when I contacted her, you know, I got an introduction to Tammy, and I was hesitant actually to contact her because she, like me and most of us here, is non-Indigenous. And when I finally did contact her, she said, I don't like to put myself forward very much because, you know, I'm not an Indigenous woman, and it's not about me. So I really appreciate that. And because many of us on this webinar kind of look like Tammy, we struggle with, I know I struggle with how to be supportive and how to engage in the best way. So I would love to, Tammy's been following this issue since I think 2015, 2018, she'll tell us. And and so I would love, Tammy, if you could just say a few words about your own journey of how this issue became important to you as one that that needs to be amplified and for us all to share. And also, because you've covered so many situations, what are some of the complexities that you've seen that that Amber alluded to? So, Tammy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. And first to acknowledge that I live and work on the lands, traditional lands of the Yakama Nation, 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakama Nation. We are coming up on Treaty Day. Treaty Day is June 9th. The treaty was signed in 1855 outside Walla Walla. What is today's Walla Walla? That's about 2 hours from here. So, and also I wore red, but also this shirt, the Yakama Nation Behavioral Health recently had a 2-day symposium on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, centered on May 5th, which is observed by many in the United States as a National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And in the past few years, we have included men and boys as well. So I strive to tell their stories as well. But I first, I'm originally from Indiana, so I am not from this area. I've lived here for about 8 years. That's how long I've worked for the Yakama Herald Republic, and I did come out here for this job. I previously worked at 3 newspapers, 2 in Indiana and 1 in Florida. We actually moved here from Florida. So growing up, I didn't become, I was aware of the issue in Canada with the Highway of Tears, and I was aware of the issue with the border with Mexico. So many women have been raped and murdered and have gone missing along that border. But I had no idea that this was a crisis that has been here for centuries here in the United States. When we lived in Florida, we were about an hour away from the Miccosukee Reservation, much smaller reservation. People are living kind of on the edge and in the Everglades, and there wasn't a lot of interaction, but because it was fairly remote. But when we moved here, the Yakama Nation, the reservation itself is about 1.3 million acres. And when the 14 bands and tribes signed the treaty with the territorial, with the governor and the federal officials, they ceded approximately 12 million acres of traditional lands. So the reservation boundaries that you see today are very small compared to what the traditional lands are. And they do have traditional hunting and gathering and fishing rights in those lands, but that's come after quite a lot of fighting for that, and that continues today. I came to this, covering this issue because in 2018, one of our state representatives, Gina Mossbrecher, she lives in Goldendale, which is about not quite an hour from us, near the Columbia River. She had a friend who was a tribal citizen, and her friend had spoken about getting her tribal citizenship card. She also watched the movie Wind River, which talks about this crisis, this violence. And between those issues, she asked her friend about the violence, and her friend talked to her about that. And she wanted to, basically she wanted to get a number of how many Indigenous women were missing in Washington state, because that number a comprehensive number for the entire state did not exist. Those figures were not kept on the federal level. They were not kept on the state level. They were kept individually, possibly by law enforcement agencies, but there was no complete list. So she wrote a legislation that was approved that required the Washington State Patrol to get a list, basically to start that process. And in the year that it took for the State Patrol captain to get an idea of the numbers, she had several meetings throughout the state with with tribes and tribal citizens, and in different cities throughout there. Most of them, there were some in Seattle, one in Spokane, other areas. By far, the meeting here was the largest, with approximately 300 people. It was so large that they had to expand the size of the room, by taking out a removable wall. So it's a crisis throughout the United States. It's an international crisis, but for me, and I'm not the first person to cover this crisis for the paper. Other reporters have written about this, and basically when I was asked to start writing about Gina's legislation, I started going back through some of those stories, and I started building a list from that of women who had gone missing, had been murdered, and had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. And that is the list that we maintain on the paper, on the website, in thevanish.org. But for me, it's important that their stories are told. I come from this as a historian, but also as a woman, that I don't like. It was troubling to me to see news briefs, and they were just briefs of women. It said, Native woman's body found in ditch, or Native woman found on a Tannum Ridge, which is where several women have been found, a remote area that's close to non-tribal citizens. There was nothing about them as people, as women. We knew that they left families, that they had families, that they had people who missed them and loved them and wanted justice. And so in writing about this legislation, I started reaching out to tribal citizens to ask if any would want to share the stories of their loved ones. And I had quite a bit of people welcomed me. I appreciate that very much. And I have to give credit to them. There's no way that I could do this work without the welcoming of the people who have shared their stories, not only shared their stories, but have helped connect me with others. Because again, I am an outsider, and I am a white woman, and I'm a reporter, and all of those are reasons why people would not want to talk to me. And working as a reporter, I never expect that people might want to talk to me. I don't expect that. It's a lot to share your story with someone and to trust that they're going to tell it in the right way. So I appreciate that so many families and so many people have trusted me with their loved ones' stories. So that's why I do it, because I wanted to put a face. I wanted to tell these women's stories, and I think it's important. And for me, that's a way to get the greater community involved, because the entire community should be aware of this. And it strikes me sometimes, I find it, the reservations right here, they've been here for more than 10,000 years. And I don't understand why some people who have lived here don't really know about this crisis, because it impacts all of us. The complexity, just to real quickly, it's hard to sum this up. It is very complex. It is hard to pursue these cases. There are jurisdictional issues, and any law enforcement official in this area, in this state, or on the federal level can talk to you about this. What it comes down to is the fact that, again, speaking of the Yakama Nation is a sovereign nation, federally recognized. And that means that for major crimes, they have an agreement with the federal government that the federal government will investigate those crimes when I talk about major crimes. So that's what a lot of these cases fall under. Women are murdered. Murder within reservation boundaries involving tribal citizens is investigated almost always by the FBI. The challenge is, and this goes to all levels of law enforcement, sometimes Their staffing can be an issue for quick response. And missing people need to be treated, if it's believed that they might be in danger, they need to be treated as a potential murder and need to be responded to quickly. I know of a couple of women who were murdered. If the response would have been faster, they might possibly still be alive, because people could have directed them to where they were at that point. But what it comes down to really is jurisdiction, and that gets into pieces with when you look at a map. Certain areas will be under the jurisdiction when it comes to law enforcement of the local city police that happen to be in that city that's within the reservation boundaries. Then you have the county sheriff's department, sheriff's office. They will have jurisdiction on certain parts of the reservation, because those are no longer held by the tribe. Over the years, the reservation has been parceled out and pieced out and sold. And then you have tribal police who have responsibility for the reservation in general, but it takes, and they also have jurisdiction over the closed portions of the reservation that are only open to tribal citizens. And then over that, and not over them, but then you have the FBI. And in previous years, back in the 1980s, when multiple women were being found murdered and disappearing under similar circumstances, in one case, the FBI agent had to come from across the Cascades in the winter, and it took him several hours to get here. Now there is an FBI office locally now with several agents, and they have added agents in the past few years. And I don't deal directly with federal agents, because when you talk about federal officials, you have to go through that entire bureaucratic process, and you generally would deal with their supervisors. But it's just, those are some of the complexities, and I could talk about that at length. But I do really just want to say in closing, and I could talk about this at length, but I think it's important for everyone to understand that at least for the Yakama Nation, I've been to multiple events, gatherings, public gatherings to honor missing and murdered loved ones, and they welcome others to come. They would like others to come and show support. And I know, and I've had this concern myself, you want to follow proper protocol. You don't want to interrupt. You don't want to stand out. But that's one way that you can show support. At least, again, I'm speaking from my experience here at the Yakama Nation and some of the other tribes that I have worked with in this region in Oregon and Idaho. They appreciate when others come and you can stand there and you're showing support. Another way that you can help be an ally is to share posts on social media. There are several organizations on Facebook that I deal with on a regular, semi-regular basis. They share posters and flyers, and this includes people who are missing in Canada as well. It's important to share those, and you can do that because there have been times when people have been missing and they have been located by those flyers being shared by multiple people. So I don't want to take up too much time here, but that's pretty much summing up my experience and just encouraging everyone. And I appreciate you inviting me. And I am thankful for those who have supported me in my work and who keep coming to me and trusting me with their stories. But show support if you can in those ways. It is appreciated. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. As Amber said, let's open it up to questions, comments, and we've got Tina has been monitoring the chat. If anyone wants to just use the raised hand or put something in the chat as a question or a comment, that would be great. And yep, Sharon Lockhart.
Oops, hi, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you to first, thank you, Amber, for sharing that timeline and for the work that you do. That's pretty incredible for all of you there. I just want to say that, and I'm here in, I live in North Vancouver, so I'm on the traditional and unceded ancestral territories of overlaps between Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish Nation. And I just wanted to say that I see awareness growing, but we have so much farther to go in terms of things we do. We have May 5th, which passed for National Day of Awareness for Missing for Indigenous women, girls, and now we are adding men and boys to that, which is really amazing. National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada here is June 21st, and then more recent is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in September 30th, and all those things are building awareness, but it isn't enough. And the thing that struck me the most by your timeline, Amber, is when you talked about those report to Crown Council, the 2 that were submitted to the RCMP in that timeline of 32
missing and murdered women and girls and boys and men. Is there in Ontario, and forgive my ignorance, is there a domestic violence Crown Council? Is there some type of Indigenous working group or anybody that looks at that and looks at that timeline? I shouldn't be shocked, but I am. And I just wanted to also say thank you, Tammy, for those comments and how you can help. But my question is for Amber about that, and you know, what can we do here to help support that? Thanks.
So again, the main reason why I wanted to build a timeline is because there are no stats, no Canadian stats, no provincial stats, nothing. Because, and it's hard, like that's a part of the systemic barriers that we have as a people as well. The justice system continues to let our families down. With that triple homicide, I can share, because it's public knowledge, that half of the people that were involved in that murder are out on release, didn't face anything because of the systemic barriers of being Indigenous, but also because they were into drugs. So we're written off. A lot of our women, a lot of our men are written off as drug users or alcoholics. I'm working another case right now where the police had said, well, the autopsy hasn't come back yet, but from what I saw at the crime scene, it looked like she just OD'd. So that's what the family is left with when the officers look at our family members and say, well, this is what I saw when I pulled up to the scene, so that's probably what it was, and just leave it at that. But, and then Wind River is a great example of just like that as well. Of in that movie, they can't pin that the assault caused her death. They can't pin it to that. But yet we all know that, I'm sure she got beaten so bad that, yeah, her heart probably stopped, or, you know, she might have had internal bleeding, but they can't prove that because maybe the autopsy isn't up to snuff where they were in that community. So again, another systemic barrier of how our people are brushed under the rug and not seen as people. And so that was a big reason why I said, we need stats. Six Nations need stats for that many people being murdered. We need stats. So I went and I connected with those families and I said, I'm making this timeline. Can we include your family member? Because it's important to me. It's important to the rest of this country to know that, hey, we need to take a look at this. You want to say that, you know, there was no other murders that had happened in Canada, let alone within our little territory of Six Nations here. So that's the main drive of the timeline. And yeah, I hope I answered some of your questions, but I just wanted to touch a little bit too on how people can show support, how non-Indigenous people can show support. If you see a rally, go to the rallies. If it's Red Dress Day, hang a red dress. If it's one of those days, just wear red. If you don't have a red dress, just wear red. Or, you know, for every child matters, wear your orange, you know. So it's also reaching out to your Indigenous communities that are close to you and connecting with those people, but being real with them too. You know, I feel like it's so easy for our people to, as helpers, to say, well, here, let's get you some therapy, or let's, you know, whereas our Indigenous people, sometimes we need to get in touch with our roots, because that has been taken from us as well. So let us go and find those resources of connecting them with their language, connecting them with their land, connecting them with their community, their nation, who they're from. Get to know them, because then that's where you'll be able to know how to help our people, is connecting with our people fully from the heart, not just from the mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Amber. I have a question. I have two questions actually for the men who very kindly came. I posted about this webinar in our community sort of email chat, and a fellow then put in the chat that well, what about the missing and murdered Indigenous men? There's a lot more of them, and you know, so the focus is on the women, and I guess I would love to hear from you guys. Just your comments, I guess, about that, or what, you know, are there the efforts that you see that are needed to work with the men who are left, with the men who are part of the families. And my other question is for Tammy, and that's you know, a lot of Amber's timeline was around intimate partner violence. And I just wonder what your experience of the source of murders were in the ones that you've covered. But please let me go to the men first. Just whatever comments you have.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question there. It's really big here too as well. I think a lot of the men's side of it, like she said, there's a lot that aren't talked about and swept under the rug, but also right now with the drug pandemic that's going on, a lot of men are being assassinated and being poisoned by drugs, and they write it off as overdoses. So there's these stats out there of overdoses when really somebody murdered them. Somebody went and laced their drugs, did whatever, you know, for whatever reasons. So many conflicts within their communities these days that are just not needed and unwarranted, and I guess misinterpreted. So I think there's a lot of statistics out there that might need to be looked at, like Amber's doing now. There's nobody really doing these kind of things. So maybe that could be a start, is finding out which you know, which overdoses were actually murders, because you know, this pandemic has created a way for people to murder each other without being recorded as a murder. Maybe I think that's the biggest thing I can think of at the moment. Anything else?
Scan up. So I guess I'll share a little bit what Spencer was just sharing with you is I actually had this happen in my family. I lost my brother, and I actually lost my niece. My niece was in Buffalo, and I guess that's where it really highlights, I want to say, two-tier justice. There's when we hear the word justice, that means just us, and that we're not included as Native people. We're not included in that. That just means just us. What we see and what I see is my brother. It's going on 3 years now, and the guy that I've done better investigation, and I found who's done what. I know who's done what. I found the guy that spiked the drugs, and like this is where it's really sick because it's who you know. Because the guy that I found, his best friend, his brother is the guy investigating my brother's death. And so, of course, there's never going to be a stone overturned to find this man. And then my niece that passed away, she was living in Buffalo. She grew up in Buffalo. Her mom's from here, but she grew up in Buffalo and she was raised in Buffalo. And so when she was killed, she was murdered. What had happened was her boyfriend that she was going with at the time, the man that she was seeing, they were sharing a bank account, and her baby bonus come in, and it was almost $17,000 American, and it went missing. And then when she started asking him for it, he gave her a little bit, and then she said, "Well, if you don't give me it, I'm gonna have to file charges and so on and so forth." And he said, "Okay, so I'll get it for you," he said, and then he proceeded to go to a drug dealer's house and make a deal with that man. And the police actually found this all out within a span of a month, and those guys were charged and arrested in Buffalo. And so my niece, she looks very fair. She doesn't really look native, Aboriginal, but she was. And so for my family and for myself, we see how the justice system is so different when it comes where you reside, where you're from, and who you are, and what you look like.
Different last name, right?
And she had a different last name. She had a last name from in the States, from Buffalo. This is like really it's really difficult, right? Because we're taught to be peaceful, but yet I can relate all of this stuff back to residential schools. So like when I think about things, you know, our oppressor as Native people, it's really the government. The government has been our oppressor since the beginning. They oppress us because a lot of people don't want to ever. So us in Six Nations, we kind of sit a little differently than any other reserve or territory that is in North America. We are allies to the Crown. We are not wards of the Crown. So at no time does the government have right to come and dictate what's going to happen on our territory. This is our reserve, and we got it because we fought arm in arm with the British. And that's how we got 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from the mouth to the source. This is another reason why residential schools was created as well, because without culture and without language, you don't need your land. As you've seen when we started, we gave thanks to all of creation. We gave thanks to the trees, the waters, the ground, our mother. Give thanks to everything that's out there. And so with our culture being stripped away from us, we no longer need to look after the land because those trees aren't important, that water's not important, your gardens aren't important. All the stuff that is in our traditional teachings that is for our well-being. And so in my own family, there's so much disconnect from my grandmother to my mother to my sister to my nieces. And that comes from the residential school. And then with that traumas that are in there, then you add in all the drug abuse because they try to escape reality because the relationships ain't good, whether it's alcohol or drugs. And so we see this all the way through our whole community, and it's layered all throughout here. And it's not just my family. We just had a hard time in the last few years. But this is everybody's families, and like Amber said, our reserve is so small that you cast one stone into the water and that ripple effect goes everywhere. We feel it everywhere. Everybody feels for one another. The biggest thing of healing and best way of healing for us is through our culture, through our traditions and ceremonies. These are what makes us strong in order to survive all of what we've been through already and what will get us through today and tomorrow.
Mhm.
So this is, I'll leave it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just add, because I heard you talk about intimate partner violence. So, with our stats, I also collect the type of murder that had happened. So, of the 32, 15 of them are domestic violence. And then, as Spencer had shared, the form of murder has changed, because then there was a little bit of sexual violence in the beginning, then there was a lot of domestic violence, and then the drugs started to come in, but also gun violence. So with the men, we saw a lot more gun violence, drug violence, and then now within the last, since 2017, almost all of the murders have been drug related in some form. And the form of murder is changing. So it's no longer guns, knives, that kind of stuff. It's the drugs. People spiking drugs, people even mixing alcohol with a drug to try and murder somebody. So it's getting scary to know that everyone's playing Russian roulette out there right now.
Thank you, Amber. Tammy, can you answer the question from Suzanne? She has a problem with her computer. She will be back in a minute.
Okay, sure. Yeah, for when I've been looking through our list, we do know we have seen different trends. And I'm going to mention just really quickly, the first woman that I wrote about who was murdered, and we know this was happening even before the treaty was signed in June 1855. But the first big story that I did was a woman who was out gathering traditional foods, and I've been in the area where we think that she was at the time. She had 2 children with her. One was a baby in a cradle board, and she was raped and murdered, and her children were murdered by minors who were in the area. We're not supposed to be in the area. So that happened in the fall of 1855. But looking at some of the cases, and there are a few that I don't have on the list, that there is a case of a man who is believed to have murdered his wife and his children. This would have been in 1919, roughly around that time period. But we do see, when I think about the ones that I am most familiar with, yes, intimate partner violence. There was a woman who was murdered in front of her children in a situation. Her daughter spoke to me about that. But there was a trend in the 1980s. Several women were found strangled. There was at least one person of interest who was preying on women and who were vulnerable. He would go, there were places, where women were hanging out, and especially pool tournaments. It's believed that this person took advantage of women who may have come with friends to where pool tournaments were happening, and then their friends left, and he offered a ride, and then these women disappeared, and then they were found murdered. So there was there were several that were similar. This was I know of at least 3 people, persons of interest, who were preying on women who were in vulnerable situations. And we do have also a man who was preying on men. So all of these people are dead now, all of these persons of interest. But there was a man who was preying on young men. And then I do know of some other domestic violence cases. There was a woman who was found murdered. Her actual cause of death was never determined, but she had told her sisters before she went missing that if she was found murdered, that it was probably him. He's also dead. So that, again, sometimes you can find, it could be proven that they were murdered by certain persons, but those persons, that can't happen, the person's dead. So, but yes, more recently, so there were issues with alcohol, and now it is drugs. And yes, I know of, there are some cases where people were with other people who were on drugs, and they, the situation escalated. So there were, in more recent years, there are some young women who have been shot. So we are seeing the gun violence, and they're getting younger again. And yes, now the drug problem is huge, fentanyl. And I also know of a young man who I had met him. He died because it was spiked. So, and we also have threaded throughout this some gang violence, and there are issues of human trafficking as well. So.
Thank you, Tammy. I would have a question for Amber. Amber, you were talking about healing, and I think you have this self-help group, Love Starts With Us. And I was wondering about this, if you could explain a little bit how this works, how you help these family members who come to the self-help group.
Mm-hmm. So originally, I think it was in 2015, there was 3 women that had women in their lives murdered in their family. 3 of our family members went to Ottawa with our executive director at the time and started talking about missing and murder, talking about their loved ones and saying, we need to do something. So they had said, we want to start our own women's group where we can come and support and just be together, but be able to help each other heal from the similar trauma that they had. So they said, we want to start that. So since then, it's grown. Right now we have 9, and we're currently working on adding more women in. And they've been working on protocol of how to add people in. They're really trying to become self-sufficient now at this point, because our executive director was one of the women that were helping them just come together and have space, free space for them to come and meet. And then when I took the program on, then I was supporting them, just helping them get their ideas to flourish. So whatever programming that they wanted to do, whatever they wanted to do as a group, whatever community message they wanted to get out there, we held events, we had rallies, we've had big gatherings in our community of giving that education out to the community, because that was one of our group's biggest things, was that we want to focus on our community first, because we need to give the education to our community, and then we can start venturing out and sharing more to others. So we've reached that. We've really reached that point, and now the group is even starting to take training and figure out how to help others be able to hold space for other people. So a lot of our family members that are in that group are, I can excitedly say, starting to become their own healers in a way for our community, of going out there and reaching out to other people that are just starting their healing, to be able to say, hey, I've done it. I got through the hardest part of my grief, and this is how I did it. Let me help you with that. So yeah, we're keeping it real for Frontline, for sure.
Thank you, Amber. I think this is a wonderful way of presenting healing to people in similar situations. Wonderful, thank you. I think we have 2 more questions, if that's okay, to get over time a little bit. We started later, so I hope it's okay if we finish with these two questions. So Alison would be next.
I I wanted to share something really in thinking about the question around that the men matter, and they do. In fact, anybody who dies by violence or in drug overdose situations, everybody matters. I think what's important to also not lose sight of is the increased vulnerability. So as a woman, you are vulnerable to assault, to domestic violence, to murder on the streets, to any kind of violence. As a First Nations woman, you are increasingly more vulnerable. As a woman involved in the sex trade, which is many of the women that I've worked with, you are increasingly vulnerable. If you have a trauma history, you are increasingly vulnerable, whether that's the residential school system, the 60s scoop, or whatever. And if you are a drug user, you are increasingly vulnerable. And so while I honor and recognize that all people matter, the women that we're talking about, the intersectionality of their vulnerabilities increases the concern for women who are First Nations, and particularly women who are living in vulnerable situations. And I think when I think about that, one of my experiences of working with women for 22 years in the prison system, which is one of the most racist systems still left in Canada, I think that one of the profoundly important things that we can do, and Amber, I really value and appreciate and honor what you're doing, is to make sure that everybody knows that they matter. And I think when you have this increasing intersectionality of vulnerabilities, it is more difficult to feel that you matter. And that decreases your ability to care for yourself and to maintain safety for yourself. And so the number one thing I think is that we really need to recognize and promote that everybody matters, and that women that live these more vulnerable lives need to hear that more often, just that they matter.
Thank you so much, Alison. Lisa, you had a question.
Well, I just want, and I'm sorry, I don't understand your legal system or how your country works. I understand my country and some other countries, but I don't know a lot about Canada, I'm afraid. Just sitting and listening, it seemed to me that the authorities in charge, the police, the FBI, whoever they are, or I don't know who they all are, don't seem to legally have proper protocols in place to deal with all of this. I mean, our country doesn't. We're doing our best now. We have a domestic abuse bill just gone through Parliament. We're tweaking it. The police, if there's a domestic abuse problem, a female contacts the police go around, and we go to a place called IDAS. I think it's the International Domestic Abuse Association, and they help the women. So, and they work with the police to teach women its cohesive behaviour, and then they support them through court, try and get the males convicted or sent to prison. We have had a real argument as females in this country to do it, but it's starting to happen. There's always women's aid, and we have shelters and things like that that women can go to. But it just seems it's an enormous subject for the entire world. And in our country, we do have drug problems as well as domestic abuse. But I'm just wondering, I was sat there when I was listening thinking, you know, what's the reason people are doing this? And we need to get some education going to find out why and stop it. At the same time, it's to do with the courts and the laws, and the authorities not dealing with things properly. Listening to Amber, they're not being helped by your police properly. We've had a real argument with ours in our country. The national NHS, the hospitals, they're just now, after all these years, training the nurses and the doctors to spot domestic abuse when a woman comes to hospital. So, or what, you know, things that are going on. So, you know, what's happening like that in your country? You need to have more laws in place, more help. And how can you get it?
Thank
And
you.
that's all I need. Can't think of anything else. I'm sorry if it's not correct.
No, that's all right.
Oh, that's okay.
Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I will answer the other lady that was ahead of you, Allison. So I hear what you're saying about all the vulnerability aspects of our people. Trust me, I'm an Indigenous woman, and I know the target that's painted on my back. No matter where the heck I go, I have to safety plan with my 2 little girls every single time I enter a grocery store. Every single time I leave my house, before I get out of my vehicle, I have to make sure that, okay, what do I need to do to keep my 2 girls safe? Because we're not. The hate and the racism that is out there for our people is huge in our communities. And no matter where we go, that target is on our back. And, but it's all of our people. I see it everywhere. And you're right, every person matters. And that's what we are constantly drilling into people as we move through all of the trauma with our families. And that's their big message too. It's male, female, 2-spirited people are LGBTQIA+ community as well. They're 4 times more likely to have violence than a straight person. So that's an even bigger statistic to look at. But again, the government isn't looking at that. There's no, you know, there is no policies of how to put compassion in people. That's one of the biggest things that our people do not receive from the justice system is compassion. Take a look at where our people are coming from. Get to know our people. What is those systemic issues? Because even then, there was a huge missing and murdered inquiry in Canada that was done by our Prime Minister here in Canada. And all that he did was said, well, I'm going to take this big book and review everything in it. And I'm going to take these 200 and some odd suggestions in here, and we're going to look it over, is what he said. And that was a huge slap in the face of our families, because only 7 of those things have been done since that inquiry has happened. Nothing else has happened. And the funding isn't even funneling down to our family members. It's getting stuck in all the other big corporations. It's getting stuck in other places. It's getting spent in not the right places. So even though our government system and our police forces say that they're trying to put an end to all of this, yet we're still met with the racism. We're still met with all these systemic barriers of this justice system that is here. So, and even then, the UK, the Crown, Queen Elizabeth herself, there has been lots of history there, treaties with our people that we have fought for them in the War of 1812. There's plenty of treaties that have been overseen, that are swept under the rug, that are not acknowledged to this day. So the Crown themselves can be held accountable for these residential schools, mass murders of our people. It's documented. There's huge documents on the mass murders that have happened with our people. But again, it's if people want to be compassionate enough and willing to hear and to listen and to accept that white privilege is real. And that's tough. That's tough. A tough conversation to have with so many people. But if we're willing and we're willing in our hearts to be open to support our people, no matter what color, no matter what race you are, no matter what religion you believe in, no matter what faith you practice. That's the biggest part of this healing. And how do we continue to work in unity, in peace, in love, in compassion? So I think those are the biggest things, because it goes beyond government, it goes beyond all of that. It goes way beyond all of that.
Thank you, Amber. Well, as you say, love starts with us. So let's go to Anita and then Sharon, and then I bet we need to wind it up. Wind down, wind up. So Anita, you had your hand up.
Well, I changed my mind. I forgot to put my hand down because I put what I wanted to say in the chat.
All right.
So it's addressing the question of, yes, the RCMP can charge the abuser without the victim now. So if a lot of times victims are like, oh no, I don't want to charge him, or they're scared. Well, the police will do it instead of the victim, so that they don't, because if they have enough evidence, they can just do it on their own. This is mostly in response to the lady in the UK. And that also in the hospitals, like I'm so accident prone, and I like trip and I injure myself all the time. And every time I go, it's a question of, what's your home situation like? Do you feel safe? So we do have that here, and we've had that for quite some time. That's from the late 90s or early aughts, or that's standard practice here in Canada already, and has been for quite some time. So that's just to sort of answer your question there.
All right, thank you. Sharon Fisher, take yourself off mute.
How do I remove my hand? Oh, there.
Thanks, Governor Suzanne, and greetings to everybody. This is such an interesting topic. I myself, I'm going to say I'm still in the awareness stage of all of these issues. It's very, very complex, but I just want to insert the word colonization in here, because I haven't heard that word in this conversation yet, and particularly for Lisa coming from the UK. Somebody, I think Amber just touched on it, but the idea that we are subjected to some of the laws and situations from those days of colonization are impacting some things. And I'm still, as I say, learning, but this is a complex issue. And when we talk about the missing women, it's sort of, it's an important piece down the road, like the policies were in place early that created this. And I know in the work I do, from my friends, I quite often get the comment, okay, we understand, can't we move on? And that's a conversation that I just want to bring up, that is such an inappropriate comment when you start to understand the depth of this problem. And until we learn to listen and try and understand and create our own awareness, nobody can really move on this issue. So I just wanted to put that word colonization in there, because right now it's always, you're hearing the word decolonize, and then everybody uses the word, but when you just say to somebody, what does that really mean? What does that look like? There's very few people that can really answer it in a meaningful way. So maybe that's another whole webinar, but I just throw that out there as a comment. Thanks so much. And because every country has Indigenous people, not just Canada. It's just that, we happen to be, in those days, conquered, if you will, by the English and the French. So that's where our base comes from. But every country has their own issues on this, and their own laws with it. So, I'd be interested in hearing some comments on colonization, but probably not time in this webinar. Thanks.
Thank you.
Off to the Vancouver Club's Live Your Dream Awards.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sharon.
And I will share as well that Gunakosha also has a cultural sensitivity training. So that is something that we do, and it kind of sheds light on that, about colonization and what that looks like, and how our people are working on gathering up our ancestral gifts after colonization. Because what does that look like? What does decolonization look like, right? We hear that that's a hot word right now, decolonization still, but you know, how do we just get back to that of our roots, right? So thank you for that, Sharon. And Eddie had just mentioned too, one of the biggest things that our community is currently working on as well. I think we're kind of ahead of the game when it comes to other missing and murdered territories in Canada, of getting a working police protocol with our own police here in Six Nations. So if somebody goes missing in Canada, we have Amber Alerts, right? But if they are non-Indigenous, these Amber Alerts go out and it becomes a big thing. But how do we incorporate that here? Because none of the people that have been murdered or gone missing in our territory have ever been in an Amber Alert. And again, another systemic barrier, right? So that's what we are trying to do for here in Six Nations as well. So we're trying our darndest to figure out how we end the violence for sure. But that's all for us.
Thank you very much, Amber. I think we are now coming to the end of our webinar. I would like to say a heartfelt thank you to our presenters. It was very enlightening to listen to your stories and your information. I think you deepened, at least mine, understanding about the terrible impact the violence has on family and friends and the whole nations. Especially, I think the pain involved to all of the members is something I feel now very deeply, and I thank you for that. We also would like to thank all presenters, participants, for your interest and for taking the time to join us for this webinar. Thank you for posting your questions and remarks and acknowledgements. Being here demonstrates your willingness to get a deeper awareness and understanding about the issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women. A large part of moving forward in reconciliation is understanding the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and what actions we can all take to reflect, learn, and advocate for change. Therefore, in our next webinar on June the 10th, we will hear about different ways how to go forward in reconciliation. And we will listen to the experience of a national educator, Barack Obama appointee, and a federal commissioner to the National Inquiry. A heartfelt thank you to Eddie and Spencer for opening our meeting in the traditional way of your nation. We will end our webinar with a traditional thank you as well. In the name of Eastern Canada region and Western Canada region Seroptimists, we thank all of you for attending this webinar and wish you farewell. And we hope to see you all on June the 10th. Amy, Amber, I give it over to you.
All right, guys. Well, again, we'd like to say thank you for inviting us. And what we'd like to do for you today, to close it off, we'll say a closing at the end, but we wanted to sing a song to give thanks to all of the women. When we refer back to the women, we call them, all of them are mothers. Whether it's a baby or whether they're 120 years old, it doesn't matter. You're all our mothers. And so in our language, we always say Gwanoha, and we're referring back to our mothers. So in our ceremonies at Longhouse, when we're putting things through, we'll refer to our mothers and ask them to participate or bring their love to the ceremony. And so this next song that we're going to do is called Skanye Gainase, or Women's Shuffle Dance. This is for our mothers to give thanks, and to help ground today. So if you want, you can put your feet on the floor and keep beat with your feet, keep beat with the drum. And this is to help ground us, because we've gone through a heavy topic today, and going through everything. So with that being said, All right, so with that being said, we shall do our closing, and it's the same pretty much as the opening. We go back through and give thanks to all of creation again. With the difference being at the end, what we do is we call upon the four guardians to watch over everybody. So if you're at your office or something, you got to travel or whatever you have to do for the rest of the day, we call upon them to watch over you to make sure that you are all well. And as well, in the beginning, we bring everybody's minds together as one. And so at the end here, we disperse everybody's minds so that you'll be free, and that your mind will be light. And so with this being said, I shall put through our closing address. And on a gigana on a tanyo when I have a sheen is I andy on a way going the way ho say ne was a hoda ne neon going dock coat now to hold one when you shut it. And dark by ye ne goes on your way go and go away and on he now go to the oh nanny some way for ya say na go hide ha jo nanny wado nanny do it for the get to and way for home do nanny go on ne hendi do it for can't to na so go in this so go we ne always a scan or no Nadi and way heki ska and jidwaya now one go ska and jidwa no honio dot again yokton nani and one go done and jidwa tro wish now once again ne gandi glance to the rock na do no how to don hokwa ne quatosini ha nadi and way hek na ska gets on and jiti no honio dot again yokton nani and one go and on adio and jidwa tro wish and on and hodai hodino touch ne guess how we up Nadi and what away no Nasca gets on and Jitino Honio, Dartigani up and in one go and on a Nadi Dotrobi, Sunny on Aggie Hano, Nani Yokiano, Nene Yokiano, Kissin a scan, or do not know. Nadi and what away no, Nan Jitino Honio, Ne Hadiakio no, Nadi Yokiano, Dartigani up and in one go and on Adio and Nadi Dotrobi, and the owner how Hagi go hidden green and they survey this song. Negane otenonia, ne ton setto, ne scano, I don't know. Negane had a mini shaggy, had they saw the gig, but ne are soft you go and guess ne hold any down strap. Nedine and Rodaway and Oni, Nada said Nohonio, Gohide Hanagas going this song, Dr. Gani Octon, Nani and one go on. Danny ton about Queen, he gave away a guy get ducks and the owner do it for the get to, and wipe for home, and Gonahonio. Negine tona and the wife on the egg, Nagi, no dioki and yellow. So near ward on a way go scan up to say why or something that's quite a new. Nego to now who had on you. On a dinner ward on a cacasongo now one go hustle. Torini of don't now one go ha. Done it. Yeah.
Ayuchka, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and learning. And I hope that we see everyone in 2 weeks' time when we talk about moving forward.